Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. This is episode number 2 in our series of 3 with our friends at RotaGeek. And back to join us is David Payne. Hi, David. Welcome back.
Hi, Simon. Thanks for having me again.
Good. No problem. So we're going to continue our conversation on automating employee scheduling, and we're going to focus on some of the benefits. We touched on a few in episode 1, but we're really going to start to get into some of the detail now, and then we're going to hit the golden question at the end around, can you really automate your entire end-to-end employee scheduling process? So I know we've got some views, maybe some the same, maybe some differently on that, but we'll hit that one at the end before we set up episode 3. We know why people are moving towards more automated of component parts of their scheduling process. Just let's talk about some of the benefits that can bring then. So I see lots of business cases which say people are going to save XY hours by location by week. Is that something you see at RotaGeek? Is that true, or actually were they ever spending that time in the first place doing it, so it's kind of a false economy and the savings are somewhere else?
Yeah, I think this is a useful kind of distinction, isn't it, to get started with? Because I guess very many things in life, when we automate them, you're trying to get the same result as you got previously with your manual or whatever method. And the benefit of the automation is that a person doesn't have to do it anymore, so the time saved in the task. And I guess what we are saying about scheduling is that that's not really what we're achieving here. Obviously, I guess you do save some time. Building a rota is something in digital automated scheduling days, something a manager is doing, potentially on a piece of paper or in Excel. They're doing it kind of every week or every month. And it takes some of their time to do. For many of them, it's not a task that they particularly enjoy or see as kind of critical to their role or the skills that they were hired for or what they love doing. And it takes up some of their time, and actually quite often time outside of their sort of normal working or paid hours. And I guess, yes, through efficient automation of that process, you do give them that time back. That's true. But a much more important lever for the business who goes through it is you're going to get a different rota when you automate it, or at least you can do. I guess you could not. You could deliberately constrain it in a way that didn't. But most likely you're going to get a different kind of schedule. You're going to be using your store frontline employees in a different way to serve your customers differently, which is going to mean that they're going to get shifts that are more suited to when they're really needed, when you're really forecasting customers to walk in the store and need that service or that task. And it also gives the opportunity to do better for those employees as well, quite apart from the sort of indirect benefit they'll get from not being feast and famine at work because of the first lever anyway. But also you can be much fairer. You can really make sure that you're not going to have, working time breaches with not enough rest between a closing and an opening. A mistake that's very easy to make when you're making a manual rota and you've got lots of jigsaw pieces moving. And you can start to accommodate more things, sort of obviously flexi time patterns, but much softer preferences employees might have about which days or times of day they don't work, or which particular slot they would quite like to not work this week, but don't ideally want to have to take as annual leave, and that sort of thing. So you're going to get a different rota. And we often say, I guess just in terms of ballpark quantifying the relative size of those things, we would say, time spent on rota building is something like 1/4 to 0.5% of your total store hours of the manager's time goes into that process. And it's true, you'll get quite a lot of that back. Maybe we'll talk in a minute about kind of what that really means, getting time back. But more importantly, you'll be using 5 or 10 maybe percent store team hours better, where they're really needed, serving customers, shortening queues, improving basket sizes, keeping the store standards higher, and ultimately making them happier as well.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. And let's just pick up on one of those points. So you talked a number of times there around potentially you're going to end up with a different rota. So that plays to some of the wider things in implementing workforce management around, although you're implementing tech, it's a very big change program as well. So change management is important. For me, there's that piece, and I don't know if you agree or disagree. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts. If the rota changes, you don't necessarily have to do some big piece of revolution to get everybody to move to that from X day. You could do that's fine, but actually people may migrate to those new shifts over time as people leave, as people decide they want to rework their hours, as patterns change. So from a colleague's point of view, it's not this big throwing everything up. All my working hours have changed and they're going to be different every week, which I think is some of their concerns and fears, understandably. Kind of gradually taking hold of the ROI, the return on investment, from having the right people where the customers are and the demand is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting to sort of to put it like that. I guess you're right. There's so maybe there's two bits. One, I guess I briefly mentioned as a sort of throwaway comment in what I was saying before, that you don't have to have a different rota. You could constrain it in a way that made you actually have the same one, and then all you've saved is the manager time. And that's true. I guess that's true in our tool. I imagine it's sort of degrees of it would be common in this kind of tool. Is I guess I'm particularly thinking about colleague availability, so the times of week that they don't work. Which could arrangement, part of their contract, some flexi time arrangement that you definitely as a business want to keep honouring long term, or it could be that that's just custom and practice, or some sort of biased arrangement by the manager with a team member that he really likes, or something like that. So you can. Either way, I guess we can enable you to sort of keep those available hours for an employee, so they only work in the slots of the week that they always have and that they want to. And I guess again, in our tool, you could constrain it in other ways too. You can sort of say minimum shift length is this, maximum shift length is that. These are the tasks that it's legitimate to switch between. This is you can only have your 2 rest days a week if they're sort of adjacent, like a weekend, and that kind of thing. There's lots of rules that you can set, which may reflect the rotas that you had before and actually give people very similar rotas to what they had. And I guess you can mix and match as well. Some people could stay on very fixed patterns while everybody else was a bit more flexible. Maybe the newer team members or the part-timers who you've added more recently, something like, use them where you really need them, that kind of thing. So obviously there is the option in a tool like ours, really limit that change, so that I guess what you had in mind is to sort of to step towards a more dramatic change, but to have, really have control of how much change you're putting through at any one time, and potentially not do very much at the beginning. But the other piece here, I guess, is that it's supposed to be win-win. So I guess what we often find is that lots of these kind of fixed shift arrangements and other ways in which employees kind of it might come across as rigidity in the rota and something that's going to stop you from being maximally efficient. These are legacy arrangements that maybe the employees' needs have changed, but they've never sort of thought to raise it, and the manager's never thought to raise it, and both sides have assumed the other wants it that way. It's just the easiest way to keep track of the rota from week to week, but it's not actually something that you really care about. And being able to specify from one week to the next some different slots that you actually want. You prefer not to work this particular week, that sort of thing. So what we've tended to find is that there's quite a lot of assumption and legacy arrangement that goes into those things, and actually using the tool in a sort of self-service, two-way kind of way, even if it results in change, it's change that employees often wanted and just never had a way to ask for before.
And I suppose a good exercise for businesses to understand variances out there, to ensure that they're conforming and compliant, and also just kind of sweep up all the legacy issues that exist at a local level, because they're not good for large organisations, especially when we're seeing, working time directive, minimum working hours, people dropping below national living wage because hours weren't recorded correctly. All those things that hit the press aren't good for brand. So it gives them the confidence that it's in a system, the data's there, if they need it, they can pull it. Whereas if it was local, I assume it'd be some gargantuan effort to prove to the authorities you've got good rigour around it.
Yeah, great point. I guess that is right, isn't it? There's probably more of an expectation nowadays of having that transparency and visibility, and that as a corporate, you'd be able to manage those things kind of consistently. And I think employees expect it too. Very strange for an employee when they're used to, I don't know, one particular break pattern, or some other the shifts that are given in their usual store, and then they go and work a shift in another store as cover or something, and everything's completely different. Quite destabilizing for employees, and can lead to a lot of resentment. On top of, even within a single, I guess there are lots of cases of, favoritism of one kind or another, either accidental, I guess, kind of bias by a manager because they didn't have time to think about it any more deeply, or in some cases, probably innocently intended in a lot of them as well. I'm thinking the first people you call when you need cover, and, depending on the store environment, that could be kind of considered a benefit because you're getting extra paid hours. People want the overtime, and aren't you lucky that you get it? And in some stores, it will be a real burden on staff to be constantly being asked if they'll help out cover somebody's sickness. But whichever it is, managers will have people that they go to because they know that they'll pick up, or they owe them favors, or whatever it may be. And that's a sort of, it gets the store run, gets the customers served, but it's not fair to employees. And I think, yes, having more visibility of that stuff and more standardization across the estate, and not having it limited politics or by the skill of any one manager, is a real sort of real benefit to the business and something that is increasingly expected.
Yeah, and there must be big upsides potentially for customers as well if you get it right. So I now go into the shop and there's people there to help me, serve me through the till, give me advice on when I shop. So that customer experience must come through in things like Net Promoter Score for those that measure customer experience, or top box score. So you see kind of those intangible, or well, not intangible, those customer metrics.
Yes, and I guess obviously the key one here is about peak times, where if with the budget that you've got to make your rota for your store, if you're not doing it optimally, it's probably the peaks that are suffering, and I guess it's not just the sort of the random error of it being difficult to do the jigsaw, but it's also actually trying to staff up with long shifts and shifts starting on the hour and the same shifts every week, trying to staff up to a peak of trade which might be 5 or 10 times as busy as your quietest hour is it's quite a difficult sort of problem to solve, and that's the time when customers will feel that pinch the most. They'll see empty shelves, they'll have to wait in line, they won't be able to get the advice that they need. And I guess, yes, achieving that efficiency. Of course, any store can always kind of improve their staffing at peak time, but the prima facie way to do it is just throw money at it. And obviously most businesses can't afford to do that and don't want to do that. I guess using a tool which unlocks 5 or 10% efficiency in the way that the hours are used means you can plow that back into 10 or 20% more hours at those peak times and come and improve the level of service that your customers will see, and ultimately the basket sizes and the feedback and the NPS and everything else.
So the metrics should come back in sales. So you've got in terms of my staffing levels with the right people as best I can be when I'm busiest. So therefore I'm maximising the opportunity, and then the other things could slot in and around that. So that sounds like a good journey, and a journey we know clearly between us lots of people are on. I'm sure there's some that are still thinking about that journey, and hopefully we've kind of sparked some thought process to explore that further. The elephant in the room then is the one we're going to talk about next before we set up episode 3. Can you or will you ever be able to, let's stick with a retail environment, put lots of information in a system, people, working patterns, skills, preferences, sales data, delivery data, press a button, produce a schedule, put it on a wall and everybody work it? Go on, you can go first.
Yeah, shall we both? So, I mean, I guess we do what we do at Road to Geek because we think yes. I mean, I guess maybe we just need to make sure we position the question correctly. You say elephant in the room as if like it might be a sort of, it's a threat to the entire concept of automated scheduling if you can't do that. And I guess that's not what we think. I mean, we've never done an implementation of our tool where that's ultimately what the customer chose to do, where they decided to completely disintermediate all store level management, maybe all human beings in the organization altogether, and just at some central way, yes, the button was pushed, and no visual review of the rota before it was published, no manual edits, no local sort of governance at all. So we've never seen that implementation, and I don't think that sort of particularly limits the value that you can get out of the tool, or the sort of the purpose of going on the journey, or even that sort of fully automating definitely has to be in your end state, in your kind of plan, to bother starting on the journey. So I guess I just want to make sure, I guess, that we're not thinking about it that way. But yeah, I mean, theoretically, yes, I think we think that that you could do this, and I guess we all. We put tools in the sort of the interface for using the autoscheduler, as we call that element of our tool. We put tools in the kind of interface. When you trigger that run, it will sort of talk you through. It will give you feedback around actually some of the input data you've given us about this person means they're not going to get their contract hours. They're not available at the times that the work that they're skilled to do is needed. So you might need to change an input, for example. So we give that little feedback. Once a schedule comes back, we immediately feed back to the manager what the kind of the fit to demand percentage is. So effectively how many hours are not in exactly where they would like to be. And of course, even our auto scheduler doesn't get 0% error or 100% fit to demand on this, because there are just demand's volatile. The shifts people can work, you can't call people in for a 15-minute shift, so you can't perfectly staff every minute of demand. But we give feedback about what that percentage is, and if you make manual edits, you'll see that percentage generally go down. That's the point of having sort of optimized it in the first place, and that sort of thing. So we're trying to educate our users gently that they don't need to manually edit or particularly visually review puts of something like an auto schedule to approve it. And ultimately, if that if people came to accept that, and we feel confident that we're consuming all of the right input data. I mean, you mentioned some good things there, some of which are easier to get at in the typical business than others. But assuming that you can, then yes, I guess we'd be big believers that is possible, but not necessary. Let's hear your view.
So, I think anything's possible with the right will and the right data. So, good data in, good data out gives you a better result. I think it's really tricky to replace local knowledge of stores. So again, data tells you one view of the world. Clearly, local knowledge potentially adds colour to that. So I'm not saying it's different. I think it just adds the kind of cherry on the cake. So I think my view is, yes, it's possible. Theoretically or practically, the solutions can get you 85, 90% of the way. So with good data, with good insight, with accurate information on, and that will get better all the time. It should mean there's less intervention. So why change something for the sake of changing it? And you've talked there about most edits will decrease a scheduling efficiency or accuracy score. So we're making changes which actually make it worse. Which then to me comes back to, so why are you making the change? Is it because you've got inaccurate data around colleagues? So fix the data at source and understand why you keep making the same change. So for me, I think the utopia would be good data in, we spit out a result, that result's reviewed, and then any changes are scrutinised to understand why. So you fix the problem at source rather than recreating it. And there's a small tolerance for kind of localisms, let's say, that get in the way. So, I don't know, I run a store that's next to a football ground, and every other Saturday nobody can park because they all park there to watch the game. It's difficult to pick that up in data, right?
Yes, I think that's right. And probably that is a good place for us to sort of point this, is to sort of say what sorts of things are we aware of that it is hard to capture, because as you say, kind of, assuming if you can create the list of those things, let's just work through it until we've got what we need, or find new ways to capture them. As you say, it's obviously better because of the way optimization works. It's a complex jigsaw. Actually, it's always going to be a compromise to have to try and sort of fix something after the fact. You'd much rather capture it before and factor it in when you're juggling all of the pieces. You're going to get a much better result doing it that way. So there's quite a big incentive to do this and to do it well. But you're right. I mean, some of the things that I guess we don't, let's say, handle as features in the RotaGeek solution yet, but we know that we'd like to because they're part of this gap, is things like who works well with who. So kind of like shop behaviors. But you want to implement that in a way that doesn't disadvantage people, give people who are, I don't know, inexperienced at selling to customers, only quiet times to work in, or no good role models to learn from, and that sort of stuff. You want to kind of get the right balance of optimal customer service in the moment, but also optimal team development. So there is quite a lot. It's trickier than it sounds, I guess, more to consider than you might think. And there are going to be some local, I guess, demand features that it's difficult to capture. I guess, again, we're quite conscious that today the sort of the RotaGeek kind of forecasting model is quite statistically based. So we're extrapolating a lot of trends from history, but obviously there could be things that the business knows about that are coming up in the future that you could never know from history, like some unusual public holiday, some unusual promotional event, some unusual competitor activity, like store closing for refurbs down the street or something like that. So, and those are things that are quite difficult to capture, at least in the models that we use, because they're so statistically driven. But because of that, it's a big part of our roadmap to start trying to accommodate things like that more, so that you have fewer and fewer of these things that where ultimately what we've predicted and what we've said would be best isn't using the full gamut of the knowledge that's available. And I guess you do similar things with your Rethink tools, right? I mean, when you sort of, with the labor modeling that you guys do.
Yeah, it's all based on views of the past or predictions of the future. And you can argue that the past is maybe self-limiting because it's only as good as what you've done, not what you could have done. And a forecast is a view into the future that will be slightly wrong or very right. So difficult to predict. And again, I think the one thing in all of this is the person who administers a schedule at a store level. For me, it's about empowering them with better data to make better decisions, replacing them. My schedule accuracy is good. The data that goes in is good. I have less decisions to make in my scheduling process before it goes out to the apps or on the wall, I think they're an integral part of that process. As soon as you take them out of that process, I think that's when you get the fight of, I know better because of local knowledge.
Yes, I think. I mean, one through the results and through the correct kind of engagement, you definitely don't want a situation where you're sort of disintermediating people, kind of not just faster than you ought from the results perspective, but also you're not winning that trust, and you do end up with a sort of essentially poor adoption or other challenges. So that's very important. I totally agree. And yes, I guess we've never done an implementation where we do sort of get to or even push for this kind of full automation. I guess because of my love of the maths challenge in it, I guess personally I'm very excited about the idea that one day we would be able to move in that direction. But you're absolutely right. The tool that we've built and the way that we deploy it today absolutely counts managers in that decision, and it is absolutely all about making sure they've got tools that will do automated elements for them, but the sort of the visualizations and the dashboards and everything else that they have in the tool are to help them feel involved in those decisions and empower them to take it forward in the right way from there.
So that time will tell. Although if we recorded this 10 years ago and said that we'd have one of the largest distributors of goods in the world, Amazon, going into shops, and those shops didn't have people in, and you could just walk out with things and it charges your card, people would have probably laughed at us. So, never say never in a world of, we've just gone through 18 months of unpredictable pandemic that was on nobody's radar, I suspect. So never say never. But yeah, it will be interesting how it evolves and how close to that we actually get, and which organisations are prepared to push it harder and faster to increase customer facing time, reduce cost, make the business more profitable, all those kind of things that come with it that we've discussed. So yeah, one to watch, I feel, one to watch.
Definitely.
And on that note, in terms of benefits that we've talked about, we're going to step into episode 3. Kind of, I think what the plan is we'll talk about pretty much where do you start. So what's a typical case study of your customers? Where do they start the journey? What things do they think about? How do they potentially turn bits of the solution on and off? And then what does that drive in terms of circling back around to some of the things we've discussed? So we won't necessarily go into specific retailer names because that's not fair, but looking forward for you to give us an overview of the Rotogeek journey from where do you start with workforce management and then how that transpires into people using the solution. Brilliant. So we'll pause there and we'll be back with episode 3, looking at where do you start. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Simon.